The wind moves softly across an overgrown field in northern Italy. No marching boots, no explosions, just silence, the kind that feels too heavy, as if the land itself remembers what happened here. Somewhere in that silence lies a small, almost forgotten grave. The name carved into it doesn't sound British, though the badge above it bears the Union Jack. Anders Lassen, a Danish name, resting under British soil, far from home, far from the headlines. Most people in London have never heard of him. And yet, decades ago, this quiet man, this foreigner, led a mission that may have changed the fate of their city. Not through fame, not through parades, but through a battle fought in the shadows. A fight so brutal, so desperate, that it's been nearly erased by time. The mission was small, almost invisible on the map of World War II. But the consequences? Massive. It was a hinge point moment, the kind of story history forgets to tell because it doesn't fit neatly between the big ones like D-Day or Dunkirk. Anders Lassen didn't set out to be a hero. He wasn't even British. He was a young Dane who refused to accept the idea of living under Nazi rule. He ran from safety and chose the chaos of war, joining the British commandos, a brotherhood of misfits and daredevils who thrived on impossible missions. By 1945, he'd already done things that would have broken most men. Raids by sea, sabotage missions, assassinations deep behind enemy lines. He'd been wounded, decorated, promoted, and still, he volunteered for more. And this last one, the battle no one remembers, would be the one that wrote his final chapter. The one that would help stop the Germans from regrouping, delaying an attack that could have reached Allied cities, maybe even London itself. He didn't know it at the time, of course. No soldier ever does. He only knew there was a job to do, and that night, it would take everything he had left. Anders Lassen was never the kind of man who could sit still. Born in Copenhagen in 1920, he grew up surrounded by stories of courage. Vikings, sailors, men who crossed oceans and refused to bend. He was restless, charming, and reckless, the kind of young man who'd rather break the rules than live under them. When the Nazis marched into Denmark in 1940, Anders was just 20. He watched his country surrender without firing a shot. The Danish government chose cooperation, hoping to protect its people through diplomacy. But to Anders, it looked like surrender dressed up as strategy. And that, he couldn't live with. While most people learned to live under occupation, Anders decided to fight it. He slipped out of the country. No grand plan, just raw defiance and an urge to do something. He made his way to Britain, a place he'd only known through maps and rumors, and offered himself to the Allied cause. At first, the British weren't sure what to make of him. A tall, blonde Dane with a heavy accent and a fire in his eyes. Not your standard recruit. But the commandos were a different breed. They didn't want perfect soldiers. They wanted men who were bold, unpredictable, and a little bit crazy. Anders fit right in. Training was brutal. Mud, cold water, sleepless nights, live fire. The kind of environment designed to break men, or reveal what they're made of. Anders didn't just survive it. He thrived. He was fast, silent, and fearless, earning a reputation for charging first and asking questions later. Soon, he became part of the Special Boats Section, an elite commando unit that specialized in coastal raids, sabotage, and guerrilla warfare. They were ghosts of the sea, sneaking into enemy-held territory under the cover of darkness, striking, then vanishing like mist. He wasn't fighting for medals or headlines. He was fighting for something deeper, maybe for Denmark, maybe for pride, maybe just because he refused to feel powerless again. Over time, his name started to carry weight. Anders Lassen, the Wild Dane. The man who'd smile before charging into a machine gun nest. The one who somehow always came back alive. But every mission came with a cost. Men lost, wounds buried under silence. And by 1945, that silence was catching up to him. He'd seen enough death to last a lifetime. But there was still one more mission, one more impossible operation that would etch his name into history, even if few would ever hear it. By the time most Allied troops were still learning how to fight the German army head-on, Anders Lassen was already waging a different kind of war. No trenches, no front lines, just darkness, silence, and danger. He was part of the Special Boat Service, a handful of men who operated in enemy territory, slipping ashore from submarines or small motorboats. Their orders? Disrupt, destroy, disappear. They didn't have the numbers to win battles, but they had the skill to make chaos feel bigger than it was. Cut off supply lines, blow up fuel dumps, sink enemy boats, rescue prisoners, and vanish before dawn. Anders loved it. He wasn't built for standing still in a formation or waiting for orders. He was built for motion, quick, precise, and unpredictable. He'd move like a ghost, his face blackened with soot, his boots sinking into the cold sand of a hostile beach. There were nights when the only light came from the moon and the distant glow of explosions he caused. Anders would often lead from the front, not because he had to, but because he refused to let anyone take a risk he wasn't willing to take himself. His men trusted him completely, not because he followed the book, but because he broke it when needed, and somehow it always worked. He was awarded the Military Cross 3 separate times, one of Britain's highest awards for bravery. But each medal came with a story too heavy to tell. A mission where something went wrong, a comrade who didn't come back, and yet he kept volunteering, over and over again. In 1944, his unit was operating around the Greek islands, sabotaging German garrisons, attacking small convoys, and helping resistance fighters. The missions were brutal, often just a few men against dozens, sometimes hundreds. But Anders had something rare, a mix of reckless courage and cold intelligence. He could charge a position with a submachine gun, and then, hours later, blend into a crowd like he'd never been there. He'd been fighting this quiet war for nearly 5 years, and though his body carried the scars, his spirit burned brighter than ever. But beneath that fire, something was shifting. He'd seen enough blood, enough loss, enough moments where luck decided who lived and who didn't. He started to realize the war was nearing its end. Germany was on the ropes. But for Anders, the fight wasn't over yet. And that's when he got word of one final operation, small, secret, and almost suicidal. The target, a key German position near Lake Comacchio in northern Italy. The mission, neutralize it before the Germans could regroup and strike back, a counterattack that could have stalled the Allied advance and endangered London's defenses. It didn't sound like much, just another commando raid on paper. But for Anders Lassen, it would be the last mission he'd ever lead. It was April 8th, 1945. Just a few weeks before the war in Europe would end. But in northern Italy, the Germans were still holding on, entrenched, desperate, and dangerous. Anders Lassen and his men from the Special Boat Service were ordered to clear a series of enemy outposts near Lake Comacchio. On the surface, it sounded simple. Eliminate the positions so Allied forces could advance safely. But on the ground, it was a nightmare, a maze of swamps, canals, and minefields crawling with German troops. The area was crucial. If the Germans managed to regroup there, they could delay the British Eighth Army's push north, giving time for V-weapon sites and reinforcements that still threatened London and the rest of Europe. In short, stop them here or face the consequences later. Anders didn't hesitate. He gathered his small team, just a few men, and went over the plan. They would cross the lake by night, moving silently in small boats, and hit 3 enemy posts before sunrise. Speed, surprise, and silence. No mistakes. The water was cold and still. They paddled through the darkness, rifles wrapped in cloth, engines off, each man knowing this could be their last trip. From a distance, the lake looked calm, but every ripple, every splash could give him away. As they neared the first German position, Anders signaled his men to spread out. They crept through the reeds until they saw the faint orange glow of a campfire ahead. A few German soldiers sat around it, unaware that death was already walking toward them. Then, a sudden burst. Anders opened fire first. Short, controlled bursts. The others followed. Within seconds, the first post was silent. They didn't stop. They moved to the second, a stronger position guarded by machine guns. Anders led again, sprinting through open ground, tossing grenades as he ran. The explosions ripped through the night, lighting up the marshland. When the smoke cleared, the position was theirs. But the third outpost, that was different. It was heavily fortified, dug in, and ready. As Anders and his men approached, the Germans opened up with everything they had: machine guns, mortars, even flares that turned night into day. The team dove for cover. Bullets whipped through the air, hitting the water with sharp cracks. They were pinned down. Anders could have ordered a retreat. No one would have blamed him. But that wasn't who he was. He looked at his men, young, terrified, waiting for an order. Then he said quietly, "Stay down. I'll handle it." He rose from the reeds, submachine gun in hand, and ran straight into the storm. Bullets tore through his jacket, mud flying around his boots. He threw a grenade, then another, closing the distance like a man possessed. He reached the enemy trench, jumped in, and cleared it by himself, one section at a time. His men watched in disbelief. It was chaos, shouting, smoke, flashes of light. But Anders didn't stop. When one burst of gunfire hit him in the chest, he fell to one knee, but got back up, still firing. He charged the last machine gun post, hurling a grenade that silenced it for good. When it was over, the position was destroyed. His men moved in and found him lying there, gravely wounded but alive. He looked at them, calm, almost peaceful, and said something none of them would ever forget. "Carry on. Finish the job." Moments later, Anders Lassen took his final breath. The mission was a success. The German defense line at commando was broken. The Allied advance rolled north, unstoppable. And the potential counterattacks toward Britain and the Western Front, gone before they began. Few would ever know it. It wasn't a headline battle. It wasn't even given a name that stuck in the public memory. But to the men who were there, and to the city that slept safely because of it, it mattered more than anyone could ever measure. When dawn broke over Lake Commando, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Smoke drifted low across the marshes, mingling with mist. The water was still again, but it carried the echo of what had happened only hours before. Anders Lassen's body lay where he had fallen. His hands still clutched the weapon that never left his grip, his uniform soaked in mud and blood. Around him, silence, the kind that feels like respect, like the world itself paused for a moment to remember him. His men gathered quietly. No words, just the sound of boots shifting in wet soil. They'd fought beside him for years, followed him through impossible missions, and somehow believed he'd always make it out alive. But this time, even the invincible Dane had reached his limit. They carried him back across the lake, slowly, carefully, the same way he had once carried wounded men himself. For once, the fearless leader who had always walked ahead was now the one being led home. When news of his death reached command, the reactions were the same everywhere: shock, disbelief, silence. He was 24 years old, 24, and already a legend among men twice his age. The British High Command knew they couldn't let his story fade. For his actions at Lake Commando, Anders Lassen was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest award for gallantry in the face of the enemy. To this day, he remains the only non-Commonwealth soldier to ever receive the VC during World War II. But medals are strange things. They glitter, they honor, they inspire, but they don't bring anyone back. They can't capture what really happened in those moments: the fear, the smell of smoke, the decision to stand up when everyone else stayed down. For his comrades, the medal didn't feel like enough. They'd lost more than a commander. They'd lost a friend, the man who cracked jokes before raids, who gave them courage when they were running on empty, who never asked for anything he wouldn't do himself. And back in Denmark, his family received the news quietly. A letter, a few official words, and a nation that barely knew his name. Denmark had chosen neutrality, diplomacy, and here was their son, dying for a foreign flag. For years, his story stayed mostly hidden, too complicated, too unaligned with anyone's narrative. But the truth never really dies. It lingers in the memories of the few who saw it, and in the quiet ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could see. Anders Lassen's final act didn't just break a German defense line. It preserved momentum, the push that brought an end to the war faster, saving countless lives, saving cities that would have burned if the Nazis had managed to hold their ground a few weeks longer, maybe even saving London itself. He never got to see peace, but because of him, others did. History has a strange habit of forgetting the quiet ones. The men who fought the small wars, the ones without headlines or victory parades. Anders Lassen was one of them, a hero without a storybook ending, whose courage didn't fit neatly into textbooks or documentaries. After the war, the world moved on fast. Cities rebuilt, nations celebrated, and the big names of history took center stage. Churchill, Montgomery, Eisenhower. Meanwhile, in a small cemetery in Italy, a foreign name rested under the British flag. The soldiers who served with him never forgot. They'd tell stories about him in quiet bars. Years later, stories that sounded almost impossible. How he led with a grin, even when bullets were flying. How he once crossed open ground just to drag a wounded man back under fire. How he made you believe that fear was something you could control if you just kept moving forward. To them, Anders Lassen wasn't just a soldier. He was a force of nature, proof that courage doesn't come from nationality or orders or medals. It comes from something far more personal, the refusal to give up, even when it makes no sense to keep going. His Victoria Cross sits today in the Imperial War Museum in London, polished, preserved, but often unnoticed among hundreds of others. Visitors walk by, maybe stop to read his name, maybe not. And yet that small piece of metal represents a moment. One man's decision to stand up when no one else could. In Denmark, his legacy took longer to find recognition. For decades, he was almost forgotten, too British for Danish history, too Danish for British classrooms. But lately, his story has resurfaced. Documentaries, biographies, memorials that finally call him what he was. A bridge between nations, and one of the bravest men to ever wear uniform. His life challenges the idea of identity in war. He didn't fight for borders or politics. He fought for principle, for freedom, for the belief that evil must be confronted, no matter whose flag you stand under. And that's what makes his story timeless. Because courage like that doesn't expire when the war ends. It lives on, quietly, humbly, in anyone who chooses what's right over what's easy. Anders Lassen never saw Victory Day. He never heard the bells of peace. But maybe, if he had, he wouldn't have cared. For him, the fight was never about glory. It was about doing what needed to be done, even if no one remembered it later. And that's the kind of hero history needs more of. When the war finally ended, there were parades, medals, songs, and speeches. But for Anders Lassen, there was silence. His body lay in a small cemetery in Italy, far from home, surrounded not by fanfare, but by the quiet hum of olive trees. And yet, the silence spoke louder than any applause could. Anders Lassen became the only non-Commonwealth soldier during World War II to receive the Victoria Cross, the highest award for valor in the British military. A Danish man who could have lived a comfortable life back home chose instead to fight and die for a country that wasn't even his own. That's the thing about people like Lassen. They don't do it for recognition. They don't do it for power or glory. They do it because somewhere deep inside, something tells them, if not me, then who? His comrades would later say that Anders had this rare kind of courage, the kind that wasn't loud. It wasn't reckless. It was calm, focused, and deeply human. Even when explosions shook the ground beneath him, he kept his voice steady, his orders clear. Anders Lassen's story isn't just about one man's bravery. It's about every act of defiance, big or small, that holds the line between darkness and light. It's about choosing to stand up, even when the odds say sit down. Today, few people know his name. There's no blockbuster movie about him, no viral video, no trending hashtag. But maybe that's what makes his story even more powerful, because real heroes, the kind who save cities in the shadows, rarely seek the spotlight. Anders Lassen didn't just save London from a mission gone wrong. He saved the spirit of resistance, the idea that one person's courage can echo far beyond the battlefield. Because sometimes the battles that no one remembers are the ones that truly change everything.